This is an introduction to get started with Wechelt secondary data. If you have further questions or want a personal demonstration, feel free to contact us. To start with, go to www.sectionsdata.sc to log in to the program. You log in with your email address and password that have been emailed to you from us. Now, when you log into the program, you will reach the Start dialog. There are 4 different tabs. Latest calculations, where you can see the latest calculations we've worked on. We have my calculations, which are calculations that only you can access. And we have shared spreadsheets where everyone in the company has access to the calculations. If we go back to my calculations and select a calculation, there are various buttons on the right for functions that I can use. Here, for example, you can rename, save as a copy, or move the calculation. Now we can click on a calculation to get similar functions, and as you can see, you can also use shortcuts. There is an option to create folders to better organize your calculations. You can use drag and drop to move a calculation to another area. To start a new spreadsheet, I go to the New Spreadsheet tab on the left. Here you can see the databases you have access to. And I have access to electricity, ventilation systems, air, and industrial pipes. Or to create a new estimate, I double-click on electrical estimates. And then get to choose where I want to save the calculation from somewhere. I will put it under my calculations and name it Today's Date and Introduction. Here I have the option to use the same file name as the object name, and I do that. And click OK. The object name is then the one that appears at the top here under spreadsheet information. I'm in Växjö today, so I'm entering Växjö under location. The date will be the date you created the calculation, and you can easily change it afterwards. We also have a signature, so I'll write that in there too. So this is what it looks like when you enter the program. To start with, I thought we could check out the help and instructional videos on YouTube. Here we upload videos after the fact, and I can recommend going to playlists. Here we collect the movies by category. For example, we have Get Started with Any Section data, which means uploading short video clips on various functions in the program. We can also continue working with section data. And we also have webinars that are about half an hour long. Let's go back to the program. If we look at the program's layout, we have something we call a calculation tree here on the left side. This is where you add things as you build your calculation. If it's not here, it's not in the spreadsheet. We have a suggestion for chapters. If you want to rename it, you can select a chapter and click once more to write a different name. It could be that you want to set it up according to drawings instead. You can also do this by going to the Edit menu and selecting Chapter in the calculation tree. You can also add more chapters here if needed. We have these 3 buttons: Original Values, Save Template, and Load Template, which can be found in several places in the program. By clicking on the original world, you will return to our original. If you have made settings that you want to use, click Save Template and New Template. If you want to import it into another calculation, you choose Load Template. The right side varies a bit depending on what you click in the program. Click on the Building Parts tab and I have a similar setup as in the calculation tree. The difference, however, is that there is content under each chapter. We go to the tab Price List, where we have our items, which are the smallest components of the program.
From here, we want to build our building parts.
Type Room and the type Apartment. Here I can click through on the title And then comes the actual price list. Each item has a unit price, and a time added as you enter them into the calculation. And it depends on which extension method the article has. If we go back to the calculation tree, we have something called the template at the top, and it is a simple word processor. Now, here I can write the conditions for the calculation and write the following included as an example. At the bottom, we have notes that are similar to dialogue. But here I can write notes for myself as I make the calculation. If we go to the base and final page, this is where I make settings for how the program will calculate. There are information boxes here, and if I hover the mouse over them, I can see what the function entails. We also have 3 dots buttons, and when I click on them, there are underlying settings. In our original values, we have set a labor wage for the craftsman, which is the craftsman's wage before tax.
For you.
It is based on a money factor and an odds multiplier, which then become unemployed.
FWS, Air and Industry Council.
Instead, we set a direct labor wage. We then also add a markup on the labor wage that includes expenses. If we click on the 3-dot button here behind, we can see what I mean. We have both direct costs, which are social charges and employer contributions. And we also have indirect costs, which are other costs that we think an entrepreneur has. A bit further up, we have different coefficients. And it could be if you think we are generally too high or too low with our material prices or earlier in the program. We get our times from the ATL list on the electricity side and standard time for other industries. If it's a complicated project or a very small one, you can go in and adjust the times with the help of the coefficients. We also have something called partial markup, which is an additional charge for materials like fasteners.
Or this.
Told ya when we look at BSA like bends and connections. When you measure pipes, it's regardless of the number of books you measure. To see what our default settings mean, we can add an hour to the calculation. I then right-click on an available chapter and choose Add Available Building Part. Here I write before the hour. I can then see that we have our work pay at 181 kroner. We get our cost surcharge of 453 kroner, and then a total cost of 634 kroner per hour, excluding VAT. It may sound like quite a lot at first, but keep in mind that all costs are included. If we go back to the building part 3, this is where you get the information that you put into your calculation. Here we have first apartments, then typical rooms, and further down the list, our building parts. One can say that chapters 1 to 9 are mainly used for total contracts and budget calculation, while chapters 9 onwards are more adapted for execution and entrepreneurial bids, starting from a raw description. If you use standard rooms and standard apartments, you must complement with conduit,
Motion drawing between camps.
meter, and so on. We have a similar setup in our other databases, and in VS, for example, we have typical rooms up to chapter 10 instead. If we stay in BS and click on apartments, you'll first see that we get a preview below.
Pictures, names, and
Per
quantities.
second cost. Like in this case, the cost of an apartment. So when I open the chapter using the plus sign, I get the corresponding list in text form.
Checking out the
On
apartment.
003, which is a 2-room apartment with a WC and shower, I then get the contents of the typical apartment below. That corresponds to the image we see up here, and we also provide some information about the technical world. Each type of apartment contains a typical room. And open up a tip. By double-clicking on the number, we can see what it contains, and I go all the way down to the component level, which in this case is ore for the sink. If the construction part doesn't meet my requirements, I can edit it. For example, I can replace a product by clicking on the puzzle piece. I then enter our item list where the item is. If I need a corresponding product, it is usually nearby. I can remove a material or building part by right-clicking on the radar and selecting Remove. Here too, you can see that there are keyboard shortcuts for the different functions. If I feel done with the construction part, I can rename it. I then return to the apartment and enter how many apartments I want up here. There are a total of 4 and save them to the estimate. And it then goes into the corresponding chapter I was working in. You can never damage our building components. If you click on another component, it always returns to the default state. If you do not see construction animal images or technical values, you can always retrieve them by going to View and checking the box. We also have a calculation total down here. As you add items to the calculation, it will update. If you instead want to create a building part on your own, you can do it by fetching articles from the app price list. I can then right-click on a chapter, choose Add Available Building Part, and then run it again.
I then get a
available
discussion.
item and can initially go through the puzzle piece to find the product I will use. Here I can search using the RSK number, and then the product comes up. Select it and click OK. If I'm unsure what type of product it is, I can right-click on it and choose Show Product Information on the internet. You will then enter the RSK database and can see more information about the product. I want to add another product, so I right-click and select Add Item or Component. Then search for the column of owner. Select it and add it to the calculation. Instead of adding a disposable building part, I can duplicate a row by right-clicking and selecting Duplicate. I can also write the R name directly here under the article. I'll do the same again for 2 more products. For processing, we see that we must choose a scheduling method to get the correct time, depending on the method of extension, time, and sometimes the partial markup. I choose Support Team and Grant Preparation. And then see that we get a B after the item number. If I want to add a building part, I right-click and select Add Item or Building Part, and then click on the tab for Building Parts instead. I am going to get a mixer, so I go to Chapter 17 for sanitary fittings. Choose a faucet set, and in this case a touchless one. Here I can also edit my construction part before I put it into the estimate. I'll keep it as it is. Since we were in the calculation from the beginning when we created the building part, we don't need to save it again in any way. If you're satisfied with your building part and want to use it in future calculations, you can right-click on it and choose to create a custom building part. I then put my signature after it to remember that I created it. It's suggested to place it in the same chapter we started from, and the numbering series will be 501 and up. Then select OK. Next time I check the construction part 3 under chapter 18. My own construction part will be at the bottom. It works the same way as all our building parts. If you make a change and save it to the calculation, it will revert to the original state. If you want to save a change in your own building part permanently, right-click and select Save Changes in Own Building Part. I will now make an example for a calculation and then go back to the electricity database again. First, we're going to add some apartments. So I'll go to chapter 1 and open it up and look at apartment 1003, which has 2 rooms and a kitchen. Here I want to change the kitchen, so I click on the symbol for building part. Go to the list where our building parts are located. Choose a larger kitchen instead and click OK. We should not have a balcony, so I highlight the radar, right-click and remove. I then rename my apartment to apartment type 1. Enter the total amount, which is 4 pieces, and save it to the spreadsheet. We need a tree and then go to chapter 2. Instead of clicking through the build tree, you can type a 2 where you have the cursor in this area. I type 2 and moving on to chapter 2. Here I choose a 3B lighting outdoors. I replace the fixture, so I click on the puzzle piece and choose another amateur. I'm renaming it to a 3 and save it to the spreadsheet. We also need a storage room, so I will stay in chapter 2 and take building part 2002. Here we replace the amount of flexible conduit. We need 16 meters. Keep the name and save another calculation. So we also need the cable tray for the wiring when we go to chapter 9 and choose 9/14. Here I'll keep the building part as it is and enter 20 meters. We also need a power cable, so I'm going to chapter 10. Check out building part 1002. This should be a total of 30 meters. That was the only thing As you can see here, we have different installation methods. If you want to see what the installation method means, you can double click on the number and then get a list of the different installation methods.
Save for the calculation.
I am going to add some more cables, so I'm going to building section 10.151, which is a so-called fast management section. This means that you have the quantity 1 up here, and instead write in the total quantities in the usage. I'll keep the top 3 cables. Select row 4 down to 11. Right click and choose delete. I then enter the market quantities.
And when I'm done, I
have
save.
belonged to the cooler.
In the cloakroom.
From central, I go to chapter 15, read up on a central point of departure, and enter it into the calculation. What's important to know then is that the central training takes place in our typical rooms and goes
In
into
the apartment, open up a window.
Brom is associated with the assumption at the bottom. To remove the central unit from all room types, I can right-click on it and choose to change this building part throughout the entire estimate. I then get the list of what takes it.
Pimps were somewhere.
I can double-click my farm to see where it is located. If I want to remove all the central ones, I select them and choose delete, and then carry out. And I then see that the central unit has disappeared from my prototype rooms. Finally, we will submit a quote for the fixture. I then go to chapter 12 and check the quick input amateur list. Here I rename it to Offet Amateurs and keep the 3 overstrides. I enter the number of fixtures and then the price we received for each fixture. When I am finished, I save it to the spreadsheet. Another way to add a deal is to do it with an available building section. I can right-click on the fixture, add the available building section, and also name it the offered fixture. I can then duplicate the rows as many times as needed.
Write in labels.
And then I enter my material prices. And so on. When I finish my calculation, I can go up and click on calculation here at the top of the calculation tree. I then get a good summary of what I've entered in the calculation. Here, each part is summarized per chapter for materials, time, and total sum. It's also a good review because CSU got the right quantities of everything with me. Here, for example, I can see that I accidentally kept the building part that only contained 1 hour, so I mark it, right-click, and remove. Many useful features to know about include color markings, notes, and attached documents. Color markings are a way to tag the estimate. I can, for example, highlight things that are not finished in red. I then mark a post, go up to the color markers for the tool button and choose, for example, red. I then get a track all the way up to the chapter to see where the color marking comes from. Is it
Waves
somewhere?
that make me feel ready,
I can
right?
instead mark it green. I select the post, choose green, and also get a track up all the way to the chapter. Notes can be used to add comments in the spreadsheet. I right-click on an entry and select Notes and Documents. Here I write waiting for quote and click OK. I then get a mark on the building part, and when I hover over it, I see my note. I can also attach documents, for example, if there is something missing that I have received. I right-click on the auto and select Notes and Documents. Here I can attach the document in, for example, PDF format. The only requirement is that the person using the calculation also has the program installed for the file itself.
I get a sandwich here too.
Right-click on the building part, and when I hover over it with the mouse pointer, I can see it, and if I double-click it, it will open. In this case, I have received several and understand, but with different prices, you can still keep the one you don't want to use with full prices. So it is possible. I right-click on the folder and choose Disable, and I still see the prices I've received. When you feel finished with your calculation and want to print it, you go to File and Print. There are a bunch of different settings you can make. To simplify everything, we've created templates here at the top in the form of buttons. If we look at the original world to begin with, it results in a very detailed printout. It is mainly intended for self-review. First we have the attachment, that is what follows next in writing. We get a summary for all chapters with both material and time. We also see our hourly charge and our cost estimate for work and a total sum. Moving on, there will be apartments, room types, and building parts by chapter. We also show everything that is included in each part, in terms of quantities, materials, and time. If I want to make a simpler form of printout, I can, for example, choose a business customer. Check how it looks. In the same way, I get the template. But the summary becomes simpler, and we then see a total sum for each chapter that includes material, time, and markup.
We proceed in the writing.
So we're just accounting for what the typical apartment includes and the total number of typical apartments. You can of course start from one of our templates, adjust it, and then save the template for reuse. If you want to add your logo, go to the logo tab and upload your logo in an image format. If we go back and check BES and look at the summary, we have an entry for subcontractors there. All insulation included in the estimate is listed as a subcontractor cost, and it includes both materials and labor. Let's look at chapter 12 as an example. Go in and check a building part, and you'll see the last two items are marked as exceptions. The important thing to know here is that we haven't applied any discount to these prices. So it's something we need to handle ourselves. If you do the insulation yourself or buy it from a subcontractor, you can mark them in the construction section and choose to remove them. It's also important for you to make sure that the program calculates according to your conditions. If you make a budget calculation, our default values work well, but when it gets serious, you may need to make your own adjustments. To start with, we can change the labor cost. I'll set 500 kronor to heaven as an example. What we also need to do then is to reset the cost proposal for work, since it is based on the labor cost in our basic settings. To get the right prices, it is important that you read the ergonomic time prices and any discount letters. And you do that by clicking on the 3-dot button right here. Then I go to wholesale management. Mark the wholesaler that I want to include and choose activated. To get the right prices, you can import a basic price list if you have one, or choose to download it from the internet. You then need to enter your discount letter, which is unique to you. If you need help with that, it's easiest to contact us. Going back to the selection of Go Assist, I included a Go Assist that I chose as an option. What is important when you read in a discount letter is that you check this as well, if it is not already done. If we go down to the final page again, we see at the top here our net costs in the estimate, which is what you pay for materials to the employer. Salary under the contractor. We can then make a markup on the material. I write 15% as an example, and it is then 15% of the net cost as I have here. We have 8% on subcontractors as standard, and I keep it. You can also place a contractor's offer down here. But what is important to know then is that an additional 10% is added to both material, labor, and subcontractors. At the bottom, we have other additions, which are costs that should fall outside the calculation. It could be, for example, the consultant. I enter an amount for this. You will then see that the cost is added directly to the total amount without any surcharge. Finally, I thought I'd show material sorting, which is a module not everyone has. You can either access it by clicking the icon up here, and if you don't have the module, it will be grayed out, or go to Tools and choose Material Sorting. You will then get a summary of all the material you have included in the calculation. Initially, we check without full optimization, and you can then analyze the times in the calculation. When I click on total time, I can then see what takes the most time in the entire calculation. If I want to analyze material costs instead, I argue for full optimization. You will then see that we compile the material regardless of the method of extension. Then I can click on the material amount and get the largest items in the calculation. It's also a good way to check if we have any zero items that shouldn't be included in the calculation.
We are learning to grieve.
If I want to bring something fixed on, I can mark them. And move on and make a price inquiry, which you send further at the end. That was everything I wanted to show. If you have any questions or want to know more, you can visit our website, www.bkels.se. Go to customer service and support. Here you see our switchboard number in the email, and if we need to connect to your screen, we can do so with TeamViewer. Thanks for watching.